Number: Galactic Council shocked as veteran humans enter the Warzone. The crystalline halls of the Galactic Council trembled with an energy that had nothing to do with the massive ion storms raging outside the space station. Ambassador Zektar of the Valerian Confederation clutched his translation device with 3 of his 4 arms, while his compound eyes darted nervously between the holographic displays showing the Keth Moran front lines. "This is madness," he chittered in his native tongue, forgetting to use the universal translator. "The humans cannot possibly understand what they are volunteering for." Across the circular chamber, High Counselor Mirath of the crystalline hegemony stood motionless, her translucent form shimmering with worry. Her species had witnessed the rise and fall of 17 galactic civilizations, and never had she seen anything like the proposal currently being debated. The central hologram displayed the war zone in all its terrible glory. The Kethmaran swarm had been advancing through the Outer Rim territories for 6 standard cycles, consuming entire star systems and converting all organic matter into their biomechanical war machines. 12 species had already fallen completely. Their homeworlds, nothing but empty husks, drifting in space. The remaining Allied forces were barely holding the line at the Nexus Gate, the last major hyperspace junction before the swarm could reach the core worlds, where trillions of sentient beings lived in fear. "The mathematics are simple," declared General Vorthak of the Reptilian Defense Force, his scaled hide bearing the scars of 100 battles. "We have lost 60% of our combined fleet strength. Our projections show complete defeat within 47 solar rotations. The Keth Moran adapt to our weapons faster than we can develop new ones." The chamber fell silent except for the distant hum of the station's life support systems. Each representative knew the truth that none wanted to speak aloud. They were losing this war, and losing it badly. That silence was broken by the soft hiss of the chamber's main entrance. Every eye, sensor, and optical organ turned to watch as 3 figures entered the hall. They moved with a peculiar grace that set them apart from every other species present, where others scuttled, slithered, or floated. These beings walked upright on 2 legs, with a confident stride that seemed to ignore the gravity generators. The humans had arrived. Ambassador Sarah Chen led the small delegation, her dark hair pulled back in a practical knot that emphasized the intelligence in her brown eyes. Behind her walked Admiral Marcus Stone, whose gray beard and weathered face spoke of decades spent in the void between stars. The third figure was Colonel Elena Vasquez, her military bearing evident in every controlled movement. "Honored counselors," Ambassador Chen began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber without need for amplification. "We have reviewed your strategic assessments and tactical reports regarding the Keth Moran incursion." High Counselor Mirath's form flickered with what those familiar with her species would recognize as surprise. "Ambassador Chen, while we appreciate your species' offer to observe our proceedings, this is a matter for established galactic powers. Your people have only achieved faster than light travel within the last century. This conflict requires experience that spans millennia." A ripple of agreement passed through the assembled representatives. The humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, their small colonial territories barely worth noting on stellar maps. What could they possibly offer against an enemy that had brought the mightiest civilizations to their knees? Admiral Stone stepped forward, his movements deliberate and measured. "Counselor Mirath, with respect, that inexperience might be exactly what this situation requires. We've studied your tactical reports extensively. Your forces have been fighting the same war for 6 years, using the same strategies, the same formations, the same predictable responses." "Predictable?" General Vorthak's voice carried a dangerous edge. "Young human, my people have been waging war since before your planet developed multicellular life. We understand strategy in ways your primitive minds cannot grasp." Colonel Vasquez spoke for the first time, her voice calm but carrying an undertone that made several counselors unconsciously step back. "General, with all due respect, your understanding of strategy is exactly why you're losing. You're fighting a war of attrition against an enemy that grows stronger with every battle. You're using complex battle formations against a swarm that doesn't recognize formation tactics. You're trying to win with superior technology against an enemy that adapts to your technology within hours of first contact." The chamber erupted in angry, chittering, clicking, and various other expressions of outrage. Ambassador Zektar rose to his full height, his crystalline exoskeleton catching the light from the holographic displays. "How dare you suggest that our combined military wisdom is inadequate? The Galactic Defense Alliance represents over 400 civilizations, with a combined military history spanning millions of years." Ambassador Chen raised her hand, and somehow that simple gesture commanded attention. "Counselor Zektar, we're not questioning your courage or your dedication, we're questioning your approach. Every report we've read shows the same pattern. The Keth Moran attack, you respond with standard defensive tactics. They adapt and overwhelm your position. You retreat and regroup using established protocols. It's a cycle that's been repeating for 6 years." High Counselor Miroth's form shifted to a deeper blue, indicating deep thought in her species. "What exactly are you proposing, Ambassador Chen?" "We're proposing something that apparently none of you have considered," Admiral Stone replied. "We're proposing that you stop fighting fair." The silence that followed was so complete that the ambient hum of the station's system seemed deafening. Several counselors exchanged glances that conveyed shock, confusion, and in some cases, disgust. General Vorthok was the first to find his voice. "Not fighting fair? Admiral, warfare has rules, protocols, accepted methods of engagement that have governed civilized conflict for millennia. We are not barbarians." Colonel Vasquez's smile was sharp as a blade. "General, tell me something. When the Keth Moran overran the Turthan homeworld, did they follow your rules? When they converted the entire population of the Mindari system into biomechanical components, did they respect your protocols? When they used the captured ships of the Sixth Fleet as biological weapons against your own forces, were they being civilized?" The questions hung in the air like accusations. Every representative in the chamber knew the answers, had lived with the nightmares of watching their allies fall to an enemy that recognized no boundaries, no limits, no mercy. Ambassador Chen stepped into the uncomfortable silence. "The Keth Moran are not fighting a civilized war. They're fighting for survival and expansion, using every tool at their disposal. Meanwhile, you're handicapping yourselves with rules they don't acknowledge and limitations they don't share. You speak of abandoning our principles," High Counselor Miroth said, her form now pulsing with agitation. "If we become as ruthless as our enemy, what separates us from them?" "Victory," Admiral Stone said simply. "Victory separates us from them. Victory keeps our civilians alive. Victory preserves our cultures, our art, our science, our children's futures. Your principles won't matter much when there's no one left alive to practice them." Ambassador Zektar's compound eyes fixed on the human delegation with something approaching horror. "What exactly are you suggesting? Genocide? The deliberate targeting of civilian populations? The use of prohibited weapons?" Colonel Vasquez shook her head. "Nothing so crude, Counselor. We're talking about asymmetric warfare, unconventional tactics, fighting smart instead of fighting honorably. The Keth Moran expect you to meet them head-on with massive fleets in traditional battle formations. They've adapted to that. But what if you didn't give them what they expected? 5. Some other Maunus. The holographic display shifted, showing a detailed map of the current battle lines. Admiral Stone approached the display, his movements causing the image to zoom in on a specific sector. "Look at this engagement from 3 days ago. The Keth Moran attacked your defensive position with a standard swarm pattern. You responded by reinforcing the center and falling back in good order when they broke through. Textbook defensive strategy. It saved 70% of our forces in that sector." General Vorthak protested. "And gave the Keth Moran exactly what they wanted," Colonel Vasquez countered. "Another victory. More biomass to convert, and confirmation that they could predict your responses. What if instead of reinforcing the center, you had collapsed your flanks and encircled them? What if instead of falling back in good order, you had left booby traps and delayed action weapons? What if instead of trying to save your ships, you had used them as weapons?" The suggestion sent another wave of shock through the assembly. The idea of deliberately sacrificing military assets went against every principle of galactic warfare doctrine. High Counselor Mirath's form had shifted to a deep purple, indicating intense concentration. You're describing tactics that would result in massive casualties among our own forces. Smaller casualties than you're taking now, Ambassador Chen replied. And finite casualties instead of infinite ones. The way things are going, you're going to lose everything anyway. At least this way. You might save something worth saving. Admiral Stone manipulated the holographic display again, showing casualty projections based on current trends. The numbers were stark and undeniable. At the current rate of loss, the Galactic Defense Alliance would be unable to mount effective resistance within 60 standard rotations. We've run the simulations, he continued. Using conventional tactics, you have a 12% chance of victory. Using the methods we're proposing, that increases to 74%. Simulations based on what data? General Vorthak demanded. Your species has never fought a war of this magnitude. Colonel Vasquez's expression became grim. No, General, we haven't fought a war of this magnitude. But we've fought wars of this intensity. Our entire history is warfare. Evolution through conflict, survival through adaptation. We've been at war with something for our entire recorded history. Our environment, our predators, each other. Our own limitations. We don't fight wars to prove our superiority or expand our territory. We fight wars to survive. She gestured to the tactical display showing the human colonial territories. Do you see how small our territory is compared to yours? Do you know why we haven't expanded faster despite having FTL capability for a century? Because we've been preparing. Every colony is a fortress. Every civilian is a potential soldier. Every ship is designed to be converted to military use in a matter of hours. We've been waiting for something like the Keth Moran since we first looked up at the stars. The chamber had grown very quiet, with only the soft sounds of various species' breathing apparatus maintaining the silence. Ambassador Chen took advantage of the moment to deliver what she knew would be the crucial argument. Counselors, we're not asking you to abandon your principles forever. We're asking you to bend them long enough to survive. Once the Keth Moran are defeated, you can return to civilized warfare, to honorable engagement, to all the protocols and rules that define your cultures. But right now, those rules are going to get you all killed. High Counselor Mirath was the first to speak. What exactly are you proposing? Specifically, Admiral Stone straightened, his military bearing becoming more pronounced. We're proposing a joint task force. Human strategic planning combined with your superior technology and numbers. We bring the tactics. You bring the tools. We fight the Keth Moran the way they should be fought, not the way you think they should be fought. And if we refuse? Ambassador Zektar asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Ambassador Chen's smile was sad but determined. Then we wish you the best of luck, return to our colonies, and prepare our own defenses. Because make no mistake, counselors, when the Keth Moran finish with you, they'll come for us next. And when they do, we'll be ready to fight them with every dirty trick, every underhanded tactic, every ruthless strategy we can devise. We'll fight them the way we've always fought everything that threatened our survival. The implications of her words settled over the assembly like a heavy blanket. If the Galactic Council fell, and humanity survived, it would reshape the power structure of the galaxy forever. General Vorthak was quiet for a long moment before speaking. What would you need from us? Colonel Vasquez stepped forward. Complete tactical authority in designated sectors. No interference. No second guessing. No pulling back when things get ugly. Because they will get very ugly, General. We're going to make this war so brutal and unpredictable that even the Keth Moran will think twice about continuing it. The chamber fell silent again as each representative contemplated a future that none of them had imagined. War without honor. Victory without glory. Survival at the cost of everything they thought defined civilization. High Counselor Mirath's form slowly shifted to a golden hue, indicating resolution. We will vote. But first, Admiral Stone, I must ask you something. If we agree to this, if we allow you to fight this war your way, how can we be certain that your people won't turn these same tactics against us once the Kethmoran are defeated? Admiral Stone's answer was immediate and unflinching. Because, Counselor, we'll have something worth protecting again. And humans have never been good at protecting things through conquest. We protect things by making them too costly to attack. The vote that followed would be remembered as the moment the galactic balance of power shifted forever. But none of the counselors could have predicted just how dramatically 3 human veterans were about to change the nature of interstellar warfare. The war begins to change. The Nexus Gate defense station had seen better days. What had once been a gleaming example of galactic engineering now bore the scars of 6 months of constant bombardment. Hull breaches had been hastily patched with emergency foam, and entire sections operated on backup power. But despite its battered appearance, the station hummed with an energy that hadn't been present in months. Commander Thexara of the Valerian fleet watched through the observation deck as the human ships took their positions around the station. They were smaller than the massive dreadnoughts favored by most galactic powers, but there was something unsettling about their design. Where traditional warships were built for maximum firepower and protection, these vessels looked like they had been designed by someone who expected to lose them. Their ships are barely larger than our frigates, observed Captain Mordun of the Crystalline Navy. His serpentine form coiled in what his species considered a posture of disdain. How do they expect to contribute meaningfully to our defense? Admiral Stone's voice came from behind them, causing both officers to turn. The human had approached with that unnervingly quiet movement that seemed to be characteristic of his species. Captain, our ships aren't designed to survive long engagements. They're designed to accomplish specific objectives quickly and efficiently. Commander Thexara's compound eyes focused on the human admiral. Forgive my directness, Admiral, but your largest vessel appears to be armed with weapons that our scans indicate are significantly less powerful than our standard armaments. That's because they're not meant to fight ships, Admiral Stone replied, his expression giving away nothing. At least, not in the way you understand ship combat. Before either alien officer could ask for clarification, alarms began blaring throughout the station. The Kethmoran were coming, and the sensor readings indicated this would be their largest assault yet. Colonel Vasquez's voice came through the communication system, calm and professional despite the chaos erupting around them. All stations. This is Human Command. Kethmoran swarm detected at bearing 27 Mark IV. Estimated arrival in 23 minutes. All Allied vessels maintain current defensive positions. Human squadrons. Initiate Phase 1 deployment. Commander Thexara watched in confusion as the human ships began moving away from the defensive formation. Instead of taking up positions alongside the massive alien dreadnoughts, they were scattering in seemingly random directions. Admiral Stone, he called out urgently, your vessels are moving out of formation. They're leaving the defensive perimeter entirely. Admiral Stone's smile was grim. Commander, the first rule of human warfare is never fight the battle your enemy expects. The Kethmoran have studied your defensive tactics for 6 years. They know exactly how you'll respond to their attack. So we're not going to respond the way they expect. The main tactical display showed the approaching Kethmoran swarm in all its terrifying glory. Thousands of biomechanical ships arranged in the classic swarm pattern that had proven so effective against traditional galactic defenses. At the center of the formation, massive bioships that served as command nodes coordinated the attack with terrifying efficiency. Captain Mordun studied the display with growing alarm. The formation is larger than any previous assault. They're committing over 60% of their total forces to this attack. This isn't just another probing assault. They're trying to end this war today. Then we'd better make sure they don't succeed, Admiral Stone replied. The first phase of the battle unfolded exactly as it had dozens of times before. The Kethmoran swarm approached in perfect coordination, their bioships adapting their formation to counter the expected defensive response. The Allied fleets moved into their traditional defensive positions, heavy weapons charging, fighter squadrons launching, shield generators cycling to maximum power. For 10 minutes, it looked like every other battle of the last 6 years. Then the humans struck. The first indication that something was different came when sensors detected massive energy signatures from apparently empty space. Positions that scans had shown to be voids suddenly lit up with weapon signatures as cloaked human vessels emerged from stealth. But these weren't attack runs on the main Kethmaran force. Instead, the human ships were targeting something that no other galactic power had ever considered attacking. "They're firing on the debris field," Captain Mordoon said in astonishment, watching as human weapons turned the wreckage of previous battles into clouds of high-velocity shrapnel. Admiral Stone nodded approvingly as he watched the tactical display. "The Kethmaran have excellent adaptation capabilities, but they still follow basic physics. They can't adapt to a hull breach caused by a chunk of their own armor plating traveling at a significant fraction of light speed." The effect was immediate and devastating. The carefully coordinated Kethmaran formation began to falter, as ships found themselves navigating through clouds of weaponized debris that their sensors couldn't track effectively. Bioships that had adapted to every energy weapon in the galactic arsenal found themselves vulnerable to simple kinetic impacts. But that was only the beginning. The second phase began when human ships that had positioned themselves behind the Kethmaran formation began broadcasting on frequencies that caused several alien officers to cover their auditory organs in pain. "What is that signal?" Commander Thexara demanded, his translator struggling to process the cacophony. "Psychological warfare," Colonel Vasquez's voice came through the comm system. "The Kethmaran bioships communicate through bioelectric impulses. We're jamming their command frequencies with recordings of human music. Specifically, a genre we call death metal, played at frequencies that interfere with their neural networks." The results were immediately visible on the tactical display. The perfect coordination of the swarm began to break down as individual bioships lost contact with their command nodes. Ships that had moved as a single organism began acting independently, their attack patterns becoming erratic and unpredictable. "Impossible," breathed Captain Mordoon. "No one has ever found a way to disrupt Kethmaran communications. No one ever tried playing Metallica at them before," Admiral Stone replied matter-of-factly. The third phase was the most shocking to the alien observers. As the Kethmaran formation continued to deteriorate, human ships began implementing tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Ships that appeared to be retreating suddenly reversed course and rammed directly into Kethmaran vessels. But instead of the suicidal attacks that the aliens expected, these were precisely calculated impacts, designed to disable rather than destroy. Human vessels equipped with boarding equipment latched onto damaged Kethmaran bioships and began cutting their way inside. "They're boarding the enemy vessels," Captain Mordoon said in horror. "That's been considered impossible for decades. Kethmaran bioships are too toxic for most species to survive inside." Colonel Vasquez's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. "Most species didn't evolve in an environment that was actively trying to kill them for millions of years. Human soldiers can operate in hostile environments that would be lethal to most galactic species, and we've developed some very interesting countermeasures for biological toxins." The boarding actions were unlike anything the galactic powers had ever attempted. Human soldiers in advanced environmental suits cut their way into Kethmaran bioships and began systematic sabotage from within. They planted explosives in critical systems, introduced computer viruses into bioneural networks, and in some cases, simply started fires in areas where the bioships couldn't effectively respond. But the most effective tactic was also the most disturbing to the alien observers. "Are they actually talking to the Kethmaran?" Commander Thexara asked in disbelief as sensor readings showed human soldiers engaging in what appeared to be communication attempts with individual Kethmaran entities. Admiral Stone's expression became grim. "The Kethmaran aren't a hive mind in the traditional sense. They're a collective of individual consciousnesses that have been forcibly networked together. Our xenobiologists theorized that some of those consciousnesses might be original species that were assimilated rather than created." The implications hit the alien officers like a physical blow. If the humans were right, then the Kethmaran contained the minds of billions of assimilated beings from across the galaxy. "They're trying to communicate with the assimilated consciousnesses," Colonel Vasquez confirmed. "And in some cases, they're succeeding. Turns out that being forced into a collective consciousness for years tends to make individuals very receptive to messages about resistance and independence." The fourth phase of the battle was the most devastating yet. As human boarding parties continued their work inside captured bioships, something unprecedented began to happen. Kethmaran vessels began turning on each other. The precise coordination that had made the swarm so effective became a liability as individual bioships. Their neural networks, compromised by human sabotage and psychological warfare, began attacking nearby vessels. The carefully orchestrated assault dissolved into chaos as the Kethmaran found themselves fighting a three-way battle against the Allied defenders, the human attackers, and their own compromised vessels. "This is impossible," Captain Mordoon whispered, watching as the most feared enemy in galactic history tore itself apart. 6 years of warfare, and no one ever conceived of tactics like these. Admiral Stone watched the destruction with professional satisfaction but no joy. "Captain, your people have been fighting wars the same way for millennia. You developed rules and protocols based on conflicts between rational actors who shared basic assumptions about warfare. The Kethmaran don't share those assumptions, so you needed to fight them with methods they couldn't predict or adapt to." The fifth and final phase began when it became clear that the Kethmaran assault was not just failing, but failing catastrophically. As their formation collapsed and their communications networks fell into chaos, the remaining bioships began attempting to withdraw. This was when the humans revealed their most ruthless tactic yet. Instead of allowing the Kethmaran to retreat and regroup as galactic forces had always done in previous engagements, human ships began pursuing the fleeing bioships with single-minded determination. This wasn't a fighting withdrawal or a strategic retreat. It was a rout. "They're not letting them escape," Commander Thexara observed with growing horror. "They're hunting down every single retreating vessel." Colonel Vasquez's voice was cold and professional. "Commander, the Kethmaran learn from every engagement. Every ship that escapes carries tactical data that makes them more dangerous in the next battle, so we don't let any ships escape." The pursuit continued for hours as human vessels chased down fleeing Kethmaran bioships across multiple star systems. Advanced sensor arrays tracked every escape vector while fast attack craft systematically eliminated stragglers. It was methodical, efficient, and absolutely merciless. When the last Kethmaran signal finally disappeared from the sensors, the aftermath was staggering. The largest Kethmaran assault in the war's history had been not just defeated, but completely annihilated. For the first time in 6 years, an entire Kethmaran force had been eliminated without a single vessel escaping to report back to the main swarm. The silence in the observation deck was profound as the alien officers tried to process what they had witnessed. "Admiral Stone," Commander Thexara finally said, his voice carefully controlled, "what you accomplished here today was tactically brilliant. But the methods you used were necessary." Admiral Stone finished. "Commander, I understand your concerns. These tactics violate every principle of civilized warfare that your people hold sacred. But the alternative was watching the Kethmaran continue their advance until every world in the galaxy was consumed." Captain Mordoon's serpentine form had coiled into a posture that indicated deep thought. "The psychological impact of this defeat will be significant. The Kethmaran have never experienced a loss of this magnitude. They may reconsider their entire strategic approach." Colonel Vasquez nodded grimly. "That's the idea, Captain. We want them to be afraid. Fear makes people make mistakes, and even a collective consciousness can experience fear when it realizes that its previous assumptions about inevitable victory are wrong." Admiral Stone moved to the tactical display, calling up strategic projections based on the day's results. "This battle has given us approximately 6 weeks before the Kethmaran can mount another major assault. We need to use that time to prepare for the next phase of our strategy." "Which is?" Commander Thexara asked. Though his tone suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know, Admiral Stone's smile was sharp as a blade. "We're going to take the fight to them. No more defensive battles. No more waiting for them to attack us. We're going to hunt down every Kethmaran outpost, every bioship, every converted world, and we're going to show them what happens when humans go to war." The alien officers exchanged glances that conveyed uncertainty, fear, and despite everything they had witnessed, a growing sense of hope. The war was changing, and for the first time in 6 years, it was changing in their favor. But as they watched the human ships regrouping around the station, Both officers couldn't help wondering if they had just witnessed the birth of something that might eventually pose an even greater threat to galactic civilization than the Keth Moran ever had. The humans had shown that they could win this war. The question now was, what kind of galaxy would remain when they were finished? Number the end of the war and what came after. The Keth Moran homeworld had never known silence. For countless centuries, its biomechanical cities had hummed with the constant activity of a species that existed in perfect collective harmony. Massive organic structures pulsed with life energy, while bioships grew in vast nursery pools like technological fruit on planet-sized trees. Now, for the first time in its history, the homeworld was quiet. Admiral Stone stood on the bridge of the UNS Prometheus, watching through the main view screen as the last of the Keth Moran biostructures powered down their defenses. Around him, human and alien officers worked side by side at control stations, monitoring the final phase of an operation that had taken 18 months to plan and execute. Final bioship confirmed, powered down, reported Lieutenant Commander Park, her voice carrying exhaustion and relief in equal measure. That's the last of their defensive fleet. The homeworld is secure. Colonel Vasquez approached the Admiral, her battle-worn uniform bearing the insignia of the newly formed Galactic Liberation Force. Sir. Ground teams report that the planetary biogrid is responding to our neural modification protocols. We're getting positive responses from approximately 60% of the assimilated consciousness nodes. Admiral Stone nodded slowly, his expression grave despite the magnitude of their victory. The war was over, but the aftermath would define the future of galactic civilization. How many? He asked quietly. Colonel Vasquez consulted her datapad. Preliminary estimates suggest we've successfully separated and restored approximately 4 billion individual consciousnesses across all Keth Moran territories. That includes members of 47 species that were previously thought to be extinct. The numbers were staggering, but Admiral Stone knew they represented only a fraction of the beings who had been assimilated over the centuries of Keth Moran expansion. For every consciousness they had managed to save, dozens more had been lost forever. Their individual identities dissolved into the collective beyond any hope of recovery. Ambassador Chen's voice came through the communication system from her position aboard the diplomatic vessel that had followed the fleet. Admiral, we're receiving surrender communications from the remaining Keth Moran command nodes. They're requesting terms for cessation of hostilities. Patch them through to the main screen, Admiral Stone ordered. The view screen flickered and changed to show the interior of a Keth Moran bioship. But instead of the seamless organic architecture that had characterized their vessels throughout the war, this one showed signs of fundamental change. Individual Keth Moran entities moved with a hesitant uncertainty that spoke of newly recovered individuality. The being that addressed them was unlike any Keth Moran the humans had encountered before. Where the collective entities had spoken with perfect unanimity, this one seemed to struggle with the concept of individual speech. We, I. The collective that was. The entity paused, its biomechanical features shifting as it searched for concepts that had been suppressed for centuries. I am the one you would call the prime node. I speak for those who choose to remain connected, and those who choose to become separate. Admiral Stone stepped forward, his expression carefully neutral. Prime Node, I am Admiral Marcus Stone of the United Earth Fleet and the Galactic Liberation Force. What are your terms? Terms. The Prime Node's confusion was evident even across species barriers. We do not understand this concept. You have demonstrated superior adaptation strategies. You have shown that our collective efficiency was flawed. You have given back the choice to those who desired individual existence. We acknowledge your victory. 4. The bridge fell silent as the implications of the statement settled over the assembled officers. This wasn't a traditional surrender negotiation. The Keth Moran Collective, faced with the systematic liberation of its assimilated members and the failure of its fundamental philosophy, was essentially asking to be taught how to exist as individuals. Ambassador Chen's image appeared in a smaller window on the screen. Prime Node. What we're offering isn't conquest or subjugation. We're offering you the choice to exist as individuals or to maintain your collective in a form that doesn't require the forced assimilation of others. You would allow us to continue existing? The Prime Node's surprise was palpable. Your tactical analysis must indicate that we could pose a future threat. Colonel Vasquez spoke up. Prime Node. Our analysis indicates that you pose a threat only as long as you believe that forced collective existence is superior to individual choice. If you can learn to respect the autonomy of others, there's no reason you can't find a place in the galactic community. The conversation continued for hours, with human negotiators working alongside representatives from the major galactic powers to establish the framework for post-war coexistence. The Kethmaran would retain control of their homeworld and a handful of colony systems, but under the supervision of a joint galactic monitoring force. More importantly, they would be required to continue the process of offering individual choice to all remaining assimilated consciousnesses. When the negotiations finally concluded, Admiral Stone found himself standing alone on the observation deck, looking out at the alien stars of the former Kethmaran space. The war was over, but he knew that the real challenge was just beginning. Ambassador Chen joined him, her reflection visible in the transparisteel beside his. Admiral, we're receiving communications from the Galactic Council. They want to discuss our role in post-war reconstruction efforts. I imagine they do, Admiral Stone replied dryly. They're probably wondering if they've traded one existential threat for another. Ambassador Chen was quiet for a moment before responding. Have they? It was the question that Admiral Stone had been asking himself since the first human victory at Nexus Gate. The tactics that had won them, the war had fundamentally changed the balance of power in the galaxy. Human strategic thinking, combined with technologies and resources provided by their alien allies, had proven devastatingly effective against an enemy that had seemed invincible. That depends on us, he finally answered. And on them. The next few months would test that answer, as human forces worked alongside alien reconstruction teams to restore the devastated systems that had been consumed by the Kethmaran advance. It was a massive undertaking that required not just military coordination, but diplomatic, scientific, and cultural cooperation on a scale that the galaxy had never attempted. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Human organizational efficiency, bred from centuries of surviving in hostile environments, proved invaluable in coordinating massive reconstruction efforts. Alien technological sophistication, freed from the constraints of traditional military thinking, led to innovative solutions for restoring damaged ecosystems and rebuilding destroyed civilizations. Most importantly, the shared experience of fighting an existential threat had created bonds between species that transcended the political and cultural barriers that had divided the galaxy for millennia. But it was in the smaller details that the true impact of the war became apparent. Commander Thexara, now serving as liaison between the Valerian Defense Force and the human reconstruction teams, found himself working alongside Colonel Vasquez to establish refugee resettlement programs for the billions of beings who had been liberated from Kethmaran biostructures. Colonel, he said during one of their planning sessions, I must confess something. When your people first proposed their unconventional tactics, I believed you were little better than barbarians. Colonel Vasquez smiled, her expression carrying none of the hard edge that had characterized her during the war. Commander, I can understand that assessment. From your perspective, we probably seemed like dangerous primitives who didn't understand civilized behavior. But now I see that we were the primitives, Commander Thexara continued. We had become so attached to our ideas of civilized warfare that we couldn't adapt to new threats. You showed us that true civilization isn't about following rules, it's about protecting what's worth protecting by whatever means necessary. The conversation was interrupted by an alert from the Refugee Processing Center. Another group of liberated beings had been successfully separated from the collective, including members of a species that had been thought extinct for over 2 centuries. Colonel Vasquez and Commander Thexara rushed to the medical bay where human doctors and alien healers worked together to care for beings whose individual consciousnesses were experiencing autonomy for the first time in decades. The psychological trauma is significant, reported Dr. Sarah Martinez, the chief medical officer. But we're seeing remarkable resilience. It appears that the desire for individual existence is so fundamental that it survives even prolonged forced collective integration. One of the newly liberated beings, a member of the crystalline Sherrick species, approached Colonel Vasquez with movements that spoke of newly remembered independence. You are the one called human, the being said, its voice carrying harmonic frequencies that the universal translator struggled to process. "You are the ones who gave us back ourselves." Colonel Vasquez knelt to bring herself to the being's level, her voice gentle. "We're glad we could help, but you gave yourselves back. We just created the opportunity." The Sherik being's crystalline form shimmered with what their species used to express gratitude. "Our people believed we were extinct. Our homeworld was consumed. Our colonies destroyed. We existed only as fragments within the collective. Now we can rebuild. We can remember who we were and choose who we will become." Similar scenes played out across dozens of worlds as the galaxy slowly came to terms with the scope of the Kethmaran defeat and the magnitude of the liberation effort. Species that had been mourned as extinct for generations were suddenly rebuilding their civilizations. Technologies that had been lost to the collective were being recovered and improved upon. Art forms, philosophies, and cultural traditions that had seemed gone forever were flowering once again. But perhaps the most significant change was in the relationship between humanity and the established galactic powers. The Galactic Council, which had initially viewed humans as dangerous primitives, now found themselves seeking human advice on everything from military strategy to disaster response. The unconventional thinking that had won the war was proving equally valuable in peacetime challenges. High Counselor Mirath, whose crystalline form now pulsed with colors indicating deep respect, addressed the assembled council during a session to establish permanent human representation. "Esteemed colleagues," she began, "6 years ago, we faced an enemy that threatened the very existence of civilized life in our galaxy. Traditional methods, traditional thinking, traditional approaches, all failed. It was only when we embraced the unconventional wisdom of our newest members that we found a path to victory." She gestured to the human delegation, now led by Ambassador Chen, but including Admiral Stone and Colonel Vasquez, as permanent military advisors. "Today, I propose that we formally recognize the human species, not just as members of the galactic community, but as senior partners in shaping the future of interstellar civilization. Their unique perspective, their innovative approaches, and their commitment to protecting all sentient life have proven invaluable." The vote was unanimous, marking the first time in galactic history that a species with less than 2 centuries of space travel had been granted senior status in the Council. But for Admiral Stone, the most meaningful moment came weeks later, during a private ceremony on Earth. The planet that had been considered a remote backwater by galactic standards was now hosting delegations from every major civilization as they came to study human military academies, disaster response protocols, and strategic planning methods. Admiral Stone stood in the memorial garden that had been established to honor those who had died in the war, both human and alien. The names of the fallen were inscribed on crystalline monuments that reflected the light of Earth's sun in patterns that told the story of sacrifice and victory. Colonel Vasquez joined him, her uniform now bearing the insignia of the new Galactic Defense Force, a joint organization that combined human strategic thinking with alien technological capabilities. "Sir," she said quietly, "the new fleet is ready for deployment. 47 species contributing technology and personnel, all organized according to the new tactical doctrines. We've created something that the galaxy has never seen before." Admiral Stone nodded, his gaze still fixed on the memorial. "Elena, do you think we did the right thing? The way we fought that war changed us all. Sometimes I wonder if we saved the galaxy, or just showed it a new way to destroy itself." Colonel Vasquez considered the question carefully before answering. "Sir, I think we showed the galaxy that survival sometimes requires abandoning comfortable assumptions and embracing uncomfortable truths. The Kethmaran were never going to be defeated by playing by the old rules. But more importantly, we showed that unconventional methods don't have to mean abandoning principles. We fought ruthlessly, but we fought to protect, not to conquer." Quote, she gestured toward the memorial, where representatives from dozens of species were placing offerings in honor of the fallen. "Look at what we built from that victory. Not an empire, not a hegemony, but a true alliance. The galaxy isn't just stronger than it was before the war. It's more unified, more cooperative, more committed to protecting the rights of all sentient beings." Admiral Stone smiled. feeling for the first time since the war's end that the terrible cost had been worth paying. You're right, Elena. We didn't just win a war, we created a future worth having. As the sun set over Earth, casting long shadows across the memorial garden, the two veterans stood in comfortable silence, watching as the first stars became visible in the darkening sky. Somewhere among those stars, former Kethmaran worlds were being rebuilt as free societies. Extinct species were taking their first steps toward cultural renaissance, and a galactic community that had nearly been destroyed was growing stronger than it had ever been. The war was over, but the future it had created was just beginning. And in that future, humanity had found its place not as conquerors or overlords, but as the species that had reminded the galaxy that sometimes the only way to preserve civilization was to be willing to fight like barbarians for the things that mattered most. The stars shone down on a galaxy that was free, united, and prepared to face whatever challenges the universe might offer next. Together,